The town was small, quiet, and filled with people who noticed everything. Every week on Friday evenings, a young man named Daniel could be seen walking down the narrow road that led to the old cemetery. He always carried a bouquet of white lilies, wrapped neatly in brown paper. He walked slowly as if every step carried a memory. Most people in town had seen him do it for years. At first, they felt sorry for him. Later, some grew curious. Others whispered behind closed doors, wondering why he couldn't let go of the past. Some said he was too attached. A few said he had lost his mind. But no one truly knew what happened at that grave. No one dared to ask. Daniel had lived in that same town all his life. He was the kind of person everyone knew by face but not by story. He didn't go out much. He didn't talk unless someone spoke to him first. He worked odd jobs quietly, kept his head down, and spent his evenings alone. To most, he was simply that quiet boy who loved his mother too much. Years ago, things were different. There was laughter in his home. His mother was the kind of woman everyone admired. She wasn't rich, but she had a warmth that made people feel seen. She worked at the local school as a helper, and always came home with stories about the children. Her smile could light up a room. Daniel and she had been inseparable. It was always just the two of them against the world. He remembered how she used to wait for him by the window every evening. She'd wave at him from afar when he came back from school, holding his lunchbox, smiling like he was the most important person in the world. But life changed one rainy night. She was on her way home from work when her old bicycle slipped on the wet road. She didn't make it to the hospital in time. Daniel was only 22 then. He remembered standing in the hospital corridor, staring at her still face, unable to believe she was gone. The funeral was quiet. He stood there numb as they lowered her into the ground. The sound of the soil hitting the coffin was the heaviest thing he had ever heard. People came to offer their condolences, but their words felt empty. When everyone left, he stayed there alone until the sun disappeared. That was the first night he promised her he'd visit every week. And he kept that promise. From that day on, his life became a rhythm of silence. He stopped meeting friends, stopped celebrating birthdays, stopped talking much at all. Every Friday, no matter the weather, he went to the graveyard. He always brought white lilies because they were her favorite. He'd clean the grave gently, pull out the weeds, and sit there for hours. To anyone watching from afar, it looked like grief that refused to fade. But there was more to it. Something he never told anyone. Daniel didn't just visit to remember her. He visited because he felt her there. The first time it happened was months after the funeral. He was sitting quietly by the grave, talking softly like he always did. He had been telling her about how hard life had become, about how he didn't know what to do anymore. The sky was cloudy and the air felt heavy. And then, out of nowhere, a soft breeze brushed past his face. It was gentle but distinct. It carried with it a faint scent, her perfume. The same floral scent she used to wear every day. At first, he thought he was imagining it. But then he heard it, a faint whisper, almost lost in the wind. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, but it was there. His heart pounded. He looked around, no one was there. Only him, the trees, and the stillness. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Mom." Another breeze followed. This time it was stronger. The leaves rustled around him as if answering. His chest tightened and tears rolled down his face. For the first time since her death, he didn't feel alone. From that day forward, something changed inside him. Every Friday after that, he spoke to her like she was there. He told her about his week, about the things he fixed around town, about the people he helped. Sometimes he talked about memories, the funny little things she used to say, her favorite songs, her favorite dish. Each time he spoke, he felt that same gentle breeze. And in that breeze, he found peace no one else knew. He never told anyone. He didn't want people to think he was crazy. But deep down, he believed those moments were real. They gave him comfort, strength, and purpose. Sometimes when he'd ask questions out loud, the wind would answer in small ways. A flower petal would fall. A bird would land nearby. Once, when he asked, "Are you proud of me?" the wind blew strong enough to make his hat fall off. He laughed through tears, taking it as a yes. The cemetery became his safe place. It was the only place he felt truly understood. One evening, as he sat by the grave, a few children passed by the gate, pointing and giggling. "Look, there's the ghost man," one of them shouted. Daniel heard it but didn't react. Over time, he'd learned not to care about what people said. They could call him strange if they wanted. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the peace that came from sitting beside someone you loved, even if they were no longer alive. Still, there were moments when loneliness crept in. Nights when he wished she could really answer him clearly like before. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach for his phone, thinking about calling her only to remember she was gone. The silence after that always felt too heavy. During the day, Daniel worked quietly. He repaired furniture, helped old neighbors fix broken fences, carried groceries for those who couldn't. He never asked for payment. He said it made him feel close to his mother, doing things she would have done. She had always taught him that kindness was never wasted. But even though he lived a humble life, his connection to that grave grew deeper with time. He felt it wasn't just a place of sorrow. It was a place of guidance. Whenever he felt lost or confused, he'd go there and somehow find an answer within himself. The townspeople never stopped noticing him. Some thought he was mourning too long. Others said he was just lonely. A few even thought he was hiding something, but Daniel never explained. He didn't need to. On one particular Friday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the wind was unusually still. The cemetery felt quieter than ever. Daniel placed the lilies as usual and began speaking softly. "Hi, Mom. It's been a tough week." He paused, looking down. "Sometimes I wish you were here to tell me what to do. Things are changing around me. People don't really understand me. But I hope you're proud of how I'm trying." He waited. No sound, no wind, only silence. He smiled sadly and whispered, "It's okay if you're resting. I'll still be here." He sat there for an hour before finally standing up to leave. As he turned, a single lily petal drifted off the bouquet and landed near his shoe. He looked back at the grave, his eyes softening. "I'll take that as a sign," he said with a small smile. That night, as he walked home under the dim streetlights, he thought about how much had changed since she left. But even in that loneliness, he carried peace. He knew that love like hers didn't disappear. It stayed in small things, in memories. In the wind that brushed against his face every Friday evening. He didn't know it yet, but soon someone new would notice him at the graveyard. Someone who would question what really happened there. Someone who would slowly uncover the truth behind what everyone else dismissed as mere grief. But for now, Daniel continued his quiet walk home, the lily's scent still lingering on his hands, the soft wind following him down the road like a gentle reminder that he was never truly alone. And if only people knew what really transpired at his mother's grave, they would never call him strange again. They'd understand that sometimes love finds its own way to speak, even after life has gone silent. The evening was calm, and the sound of the wind brushing through the trees filled the air. Daniel walked the familiar path to the cemetery, carrying his bouquet of white lilies. The sun had just started to set, leaving behind a warm orange glow that stretched across the horizon. It was his favorite time of day, quiet, gentle, and peaceful. He had been visiting his mother's grave for years now. The routine was the same, yet every time he came, it felt different. There was always something special about those moments, something he couldn't explain but could always feel. He pushed open the rusty cemetery gate and walked toward the far corner where his mother rested. The grass was overgrown and the air smelled faintly of wet soil and flowers. As he reached the grave, he kneeled down, brushing away the leaves that had fallen since his last visit. "Hi, Mom," he whispered softly, his voice breaking the silence. "It's Friday again. You'd probably tell me I need to go out more, right?" He smiled faintly as he placed the lilies neatly in the vase. The white petals shone against the dark stone. "I fixed the old fence for Mrs. Grant this week," he continued. "She's too old to do it herself, and she tried to pay me again. You'd laugh if you saw how stubborn she gets. I didn't take a penny, of course." He paused and let out a quiet breath. "You always told me kindness isn't about money. It's about doing what feels right." I try to remember that. A soft breeze passed through the trees. The lilies swayed gently. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. The feeling was familiar, that gentle touch in the air as if someone invisible was brushing by him. "I know you're listening," he whispered. "I can feel it." The wind seemed to hum faintly, carrying the scent of the lilies through the air. He stayed there for a while, talking about small things, his week, his worries, and the things he still wished he could ask her. To anyone else, it might have looked like a man talking to the air. But for him, it was the only time he felt truly heard. He didn't notice the figure standing at the far end of the cemetery, watching quietly from a distance. A woman had been walking home from work and had taken a shortcut through the cemetery that evening. Her name was Lena. She had only recently moved to the town and didn't know many people yet. The first time she saw Daniel, she thought he was a visitor like anyone else. But after a few minutes, she realized he wasn't just placing flowers and leaving. He was talking, whispering as though in a real conversation. Something about his stillness caught her attention. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but the expression on his face told her it wasn't sadness alone. There was peace there too, a strange, quiet peace she didn't understand. Lena didn't mean to stare, but she couldn't look away. There was something about the way he talked, the way he paused as if he were listening to someone, that made her wonder what really went on in his heart. When she realized she had been standing too long, she turned quickly and left. But that image stayed in her mind. The next Friday, as she walked home again, her path took her past the cemetery. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to stop near the gate. And there he was again. Same spot, same bouquet of lilies, same calm expression. She leaned against the gate, pretending to look at her phone, though her eyes kept drifting toward him. He sat on the grass this time, his hands resting on his knees, speaking softly. She could barely hear his voice, but the tone was gentle, like someone speaking to a loved one who had just fallen asleep. After a while, he stood up, adjusted the flowers, and looked at the grave for a long time before leaving. When he walked past her, she lowered her head quickly, pretending to be busy on her phone. He didn't notice her. He just kept walking, lost in thought. That night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about him. Something about the way he visited that grave week after week made her feel both sad and curious. She wondered who was buried there and what kept him coming back. Days passed and she went on with her routine. But when Friday came again, she found herself near the cemetery once more. She told herself it was just coincidence, but deep down she knew she was there because she wanted to see him again. He arrived right on time, walking the same slow, careful way he always did. This time she decided to get a little closer. She walked quietly between the rows of graves, pretending to read the headstones as she approached. Daniel didn't notice her at first. He was focused, speaking in a low voice, his hand resting gently on the headstone. Lena stopped a few meters away, her heart beating fast. She didn't want to intrude, but she wanted to understand. She could hear fragments of his words. "I'm trying my best, Mom. You always said to help others even when it's not easy. I'm doing that, I promise." Then silence followed by a faint laugh, the kind of laugh someone gives when remembering something dear. Lena took a quiet step back. She suddenly felt she was witnessing something too personal. She turned and walked away quickly, her mind spinning. That night she told herself she shouldn't care. Everyone had their own way of dealing with loss. But something about him felt different. It wasn't just grief. It was like he was living between two worlds, one of the living and one that belonged to memory. The next week, it rained heavily. Lena assumed Daniel wouldn't come, but when she passed by the cemetery that evening through the gray drizzle, she saw him again. The rain poured down on him, soaking his jacket, yet he didn't move. He knelt there, the bouquet of lilies pressed against the wet earth. Lena stood by the gate, holding her umbrella, watching in disbelief. Most people would have run for cover, but he stayed, speaking softly, his voice lost in the rain. When she couldn't stand just watching anymore, she walked toward him slowly. "Hey," she said gently, "you'll get sick if you stay here in the rain." Daniel turned his head slightly, surprised. His eyes were calm, his voice quiet. "It's okay. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't be," she replied. "It's freezing." He smiled faintly.
"I can't leave without finishing my talk." She looked at the grave, then back at him.
"I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just worried." He shook his head softly. "No, it's fine. Most people just walk past. You're the first to stop." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the rain filled the space between them. Lena hesitated before asking, "Was she someone close to you?" He looked at the headstone, his eyes softening. "She was my mother." Lena nodded slowly. "You must have loved her very much." "I still do," he said quietly. "She's the reason I keep going." There was something in his tone that made her chest tighten. It wasn't just sorrow, it was devotion. After a pause, she said, "Well, I'll let you have your time. Just don't stay too long in the rain, okay?" He nodded. Thank you. Lena turned and walked away, the sound of rain echoing against her umbrella. When she glanced back once more, Daniel was still there, his head bowed, the lilies bright against the gray sky. That night she couldn't stop thinking about him again. Something inside her wanted to know more, not out of curiosity, but because she felt there was a story there, something deep and human. The next week, she found herself back at the cemetery, this time not by accident. She waited near the gate, pretending to look at her watch. When Daniel arrived, he noticed her this time. He gave a polite nod before walking past her. After a few minutes, she gathered her courage and walked toward him again. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." They sat in silence for a while, facing the grave. The air smelled of grass and flowers. Finally, she spoke. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but why lilies every time?" He looked down at the bouquet and smiled faintly. She loved them, said they reminded her of peace. "They're beautiful," Lena said. "You must miss her a lot." "I do," he replied. "But I still feel her here. It's strange, but when I talk it feels like she's listening." Lena's eyes softened. "Maybe she is." He looked at her for a moment, studying her face, then turned back to the grave. "Maybe," he said quietly. The sun began to set, painting the sky in gold and pink. The two of them sat in silence, and for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel alone. The breeze picked up softly, brushing through the trees. The lilies swayed again as if greeting the moment. Daniel glanced at them and smiled, and for a brief second Lena thought she saw something too. A faint shimmer in the air, a warmth that couldn't be explained. She didn't say anything, but she knew in that instant that there was something real, something unseen that connected Daniel to this place. She walked home that evening in silence, her mind full of questions. Who was this man who still found comfort at his mother's grave? What really happened when he spoke there? If only she knew. The truth behind those quiet conversations was more powerful than she could imagine. The following weeks passed quietly, but things between Daniel and Lena began to change little by little. What started as small conversations at the cemetery turned into something more natural, something almost like friendship. Every Friday, she would appear near the same old gate around the time he arrived. Sometimes she'd wait for him to finish his quiet talk before joining him, and sometimes she'd walk with him to the grave from the start. Daniel didn't mind her company anymore. In fact, he had grown used to seeing her there. They didn't always talk much, but there was a comfort in their silence. Lena had a calm way of being present, never asking too many questions, never judging. She'd sit on the grass beside him, looking at the lilies, and occasionally ask small, gentle questions that opened bits of his heart at a time. One evening, as the two sat watching the sunset fade behind the trees, Lena turned to him and said softly, "You know, most people don't keep visiting graves this long. Not every week like this." Daniel looked at the ground, his voice low. "I know, people tell me I should move on. But I don't think love works like that. When someone means that much to you, you don't just stop visiting." Lena nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Maybe moving on doesn't mean forgetting." He glanced at her, surprised at her words. "Exactly," he said. "It's about remembering, in a way that doesn't hurt so much anymore." She smiled faintly, pulling her jacket closer as the evening wind picked up. "I think she'd be proud of you. You've kept her memory alive." Daniel's lips curved in a small smile. "I hope so." There was a pause, and then Lena asked, "When you talk to her, do you really feel like she's there?" He hesitated, unsure how to answer. It was something he never spoke about with anyone. "Yes," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not in the way you'd think. I don't see her, but I feel her. It's hard to explain, but when I'm here, it's like..." "I'm not alone." Lena looked at him closely. "I believe you," she said softly. "Sometimes people don't need to see to feel something real." That made him smile again, a small, grateful smile. For the next few weeks, they continued to meet. Sometimes they'd bring coffee and sit for hours talking about small things, old memories, books, the weather, simple stories from the town. Other times they wouldn't talk at all. Daniel would speak quietly to his mother's grave while Lena waited nearby, never interrupting, just letting him have his moment. But deep inside, Lena's curiosity was growing. There was something she still didn't understand. Something about the way Daniel interacted with the grave that felt almost alive. She started noticing small details. The flowers he placed never seemed to wilt as fast as others. The air around that corner of the cemetery always felt softer, almost lighter. And once, when she walked by the grave during the week when Daniel wasn't there, she saw something strange. A tiny paper folded neatly and placed on the headstone. She picked it up gently. It was damp from the morning dew, but when she unfolded it, she saw that it was a handwritten note. The ink was smudged, but she could still read the words. "Thank you for reminding me to be kind," it said. "I did what you asked. I helped Mr. Carter fix his fence today. You were right, and it felt good." Lena's heart thudded. The note was clearly from Daniel. He wasn't just talking to his mother. He was writing to her like he was reporting back, as if she were still guiding him. She carefully placed the paper back where she found it and left the cemetery with questions swirling in her mind. That evening, when Daniel arrived, she didn't mention what she had found. Instead, she watched quietly as he cleaned the grave and replaced the old flowers with new ones. He looked peaceful, almost content, as if this place gave him a kind of strength that nothing else could. When he sat down beside the grave, she noticed how his eyes softened, how his breathing slowed. It wasn't like a man lost in grief. It was like someone reconnecting with something sacred. Lena finally asked, "What do you usually tell her?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Everything. About my week, about people I meet, about the things I fix. I tell her when I feel lost, too. And when I don't know what to do, I ask her." "Ask her," Lena said gently. "Yes," he replied, still looking at the headstone. "And somehow I always get an answer." She tilted her head slightly. "How?" He hesitated again, then said, "It's not like she speaks out loud. It's more like the world answers for her. Sometimes it's a breeze that comes at the right moment. Sometimes it's a bird landing near me, or a flower petal falling when I ask something." "It sounds silly, I know," Lena shook her head. "No, it doesn't sound silly at all. Maybe it's her way of reminding you she's still here." Daniel looked at her for a moment, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. "I'd like to think so." Over time, Lena began to see Daniel differently. What she first thought was sadness now looked like strength. There was something pure in his loyalty, something almost rare. He wasn't trapped by grief. He was guided by love. One late afternoon, when the sky was turning pink, Lena arrived early and waited by the grave. She wanted to surprise him with coffee, but when she got there, she noticed something again. The lilies he had placed last week were still fresh. She bent down and touched one, soft, cool, and alive. She frowned slightly. "That's not possible," she whispered to herself. Just then she heard footsteps. Daniel appeared with a gentle smile and another bouquet in hand. "You beat me here today," he said warmly. "I thought you might like some coffee," she replied, handing him the cup. "Thank you," he said, sitting beside her. They both looked at the flowers for a moment. "Daniel," she began softly, "these lilies, how do they still look so fresh? They've been here all week." He looked at them quietly. "I don't know. Maybe it's her way of showing she likes them." "You really believe that?" He nodded. "Yes, I don't have any other explanation." Lena looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think she ever answers you in words?" Daniel smiled. "No, but I don't need her to. The feeling is enough. It's like hearing with your heart instead of your ears." They sat quietly for a long time. The wind blew gently through the trees, and the soft rustling filled the air like a whisper. Lena closed her eyes and let herself feel it too. It was strange, but she understood what he meant. There was peace there, an invisible presence that made everything feel softer. After that day, Lena started helping him clean the grave, arranging the flowers, and even bringing small things like candles or ribbons. It became their shared ritual. The cemetery didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive with stories of love, of loss, and of connection that refused to fade. But even as she grew closer to Daniel, a part of her couldn't stop wondering what really happened when he was alone. Because sometimes when she arrived late, she'd see him smiling at nothing, nodding as if listening to someone right beside him. Once she caught him whispering, "I know. I'll do it tomorrow. Don't worry." His tone was soft, patient, like a son answering a mother's gentle reminder. Lena's breath had caught in her throat as she realized he wasn't pretending. He genuinely believed he was being guided. And maybe in a way she couldn't understand, he was. That night she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to that quiet man who spoke to the wind and found peace in a place where others only found sorrow. The next morning, she walked to the cemetery alone. She wanted to see it in daylight to understand what he felt. The place was calm. Birds chirped in the trees and sunlight spilled softly across the rows of graves. She stood before his mother's headstone and whispered, "You must be proud of him." Just then a light breeze brushed her cheek, soft and warm. She froze, a shiver running through her body. She looked around. The air was still again. For the first time, she truly believed that maybe Daniel was right. Maybe love didn't disappear. Maybe it lingered, unseen, but real. That evening, when she met Daniel again, she didn't mention what she'd felt. She just smiled at him and said, "I think she's happy you're not alone anymore." He looked at her with quiet eyes and replied, "Maybe she sent you here to make sure of that." The two of them shared a silent smile as the wind blew gently once again, carrying the faint scent of lilies through the air. Neither spoke for the rest of the evening. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything, and though neither of them knew it yet, that silence, and what it carried, would soon reveal a truth deeper than either of them could have imagined. That evening, the sky was heavy with dark clouds and the air smelled like rain. Daniel walked the familiar narrow path leading to the cemetery, holding the small bouquet of white lilies close to his chest. His steps were slower than usual, his shoulders slightly bent as if the weight of his thoughts had made his body tired. He had come here hundreds of times, yet each visit felt like the first. Every step carried a memory. Every breath carried a name he couldn't forget. The wind picked up as he reached the old gate. It creaked softly, the same sound he'd heard for years, a sound that strangely brought him comfort. He made his way to his mother's grave, brushing away a few fallen leaves as he knelt down. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking with the kind of tenderness that comes only from love and loss mixed together. He placed the lilies down, arranging them carefully, just as she used to when decorating their small living room vase. He smiled a little, remembering how she always said white lilies looked peaceful like quiet smiles. Then his voice softened. "You'd laugh at me if you saw me now, wouldn't you?" Still talking to the air. A faint breeze touched his face. It was light, gentle, and for a brief moment he closed his eyes. Sometimes it was in that quiet stillness that he felt her presence most clearly, not as a voice exactly, but as something warm in his chest, something real and alive. He whispered about his week, about how Lena had stopped by with a jar of homemade jam, saying she had made too much. He told her about how he fixed an old man's fence down the street without telling him, and how it made him smile to see the man's surprise the next morning. He paused for a moment, thinking. "I've been trying, Mom, I really have. You told me to keep doing small good things, remember? Sometimes I feel like you're the one guiding me, like you're whispering those ideas into my head." He stayed quiet for a while, listening to the soft sound of the trees moving in the wind. Then, without turning around, he said softly, "Someone found out. The woman I told you about, Lena. She's seen me here a few times. I think she's starting to understand." Just then, thunder rolled in the distance. Daniel looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. "It's going to rain again, isn't it? You always said rain cleans everything. Maybe that's why you loved it." He stayed there longer than usual until a few drops started to fall. He didn't move. He just sat quietly, letting the rain fall over him, his eyes closed, his heart full. The next morning, Lena came by his house. She looked a little hesitant but also curious. She had been seeing him for weeks now, always at the same time, always at the same spot. And though she never wanted to intrude, something about him made her feel connected. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said softly when he opened the door. "Not at all," he replied, stepping aside to let her in. His house was simple with only a few things. An old photo of his mother on the wall, a small table, 2 chairs, and a vase with white lilies in it. They sat quietly for a while before she finally said, "You talk to her, don't you? At the grave?" Daniel looked down, unsure of how to answer. "I do," he said finally. "Not like you think. I don't imagine things or pretend she's there. It's different." She nodded slowly. "I didn't mean to pry. It's just, I've seen you there, and there's something peaceful about how you are when you're talking. I wanted to understand." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You really want to know?" She nodded again. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused on the photo on the wall. The first time I heard her was a week after the funeral. I went there to sit by her grave because I couldn't handle the silence in the house. I remember crying so much that my chest hurt. And then I heard her voice, not from outside, not from above, but inside me. It was so clear. She said, "Don't cry like that, my boy, I'm right here." I thought I was losing my mind. Lena listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "I didn't tell anyone," Daniel continued. "I was afraid they'd think I was broken. But it kept happening. Every time I went, I'd hear her. Sometimes it was just a feeling. Other times it was like she was whispering. She told me to keep living. She told me to be kind. She said love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes, that's all." He smiled sadly. She even reminded me of things I'd forgotten. Small things, like the way she'd hide chocolates in the kitchen drawer, or how she used to hum when cooking. I couldn't have imagined that detail. That's how I knew it was her. Lena's eyes softened. "And that's when you started helping people?" Daniel nodded. "She told me that every time I felt lost, I should do something kind, even if it's small. That's how I could keep her alive. So I did. I didn't have much, but I had time. I fixed things for neighbors, bought a meal for someone who couldn't afford it, left flowers for a woman who lost her husband, and every time I did something good, I felt her closer." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. Lena whispered, "That's beautiful." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just the way I survive." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think people would understand if you told them?" He shook his head. "No. They'd think I'm crazy. People don't believe in quiet miracles anymore. They only believe what they can see." She sighed softly. "Then maybe that's why some things are meant to stay between you and her." Daniel looked up at her, grateful. "You believe me?" "I believe your heart," she said simply. "And that's enough." From that day on, Lena became part of Daniel's quiet world. Sometimes she'd join him at the cemetery, standing a few steps behind while he spoke softly to the grave. She never interrupted, never asked what he heard. She just watched the way his face changed, the sadness softening into peace, the loneliness turning into calm. One evening, as they were leaving the cemetery, Lena said, "I think she's still helping you, not by speaking, but by reminding you how to love." Daniel nodded. "Maybe that's what all love does. It keeps working, even after we're gone." Weeks passed, and Daniel kept visiting the grave. He felt stronger now, less afraid of being alone. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way the sunlight touched the gravestone at sunset, the sound of the wind between the trees that always seemed to whisper softly when he said goodbye. One day he brought a letter. He placed it under a small stone by the grave and said, "It's time I say thank you." That evening, as he left the cemetery, he noticed Lena watching him from a distance. She smiled but said nothing. She didn't need to. That night, Daniel dreamed of his mother for the first time in years. In the dream, she wasn't speaking. She was just standing in the kitchen, humming that same tune she used to hum when cooking. When he woke up, he felt something shift inside him, not sadness, but peace. The next morning, he went back to the cemetery. The letter he had left was gone. Only the small stone remained. For a moment, he froze. The ground looked undisturbed, no signs of wind or animals. Just the stone, sitting perfectly where he left it. He smiled to himself. "So you read it, huh?" he whispered. The wind picked up gently, carrying a few petals from the lilies across the grass. He stood there quietly, eyes closed, feeling the air move around him. It wasn't a voice, but it was enough. It was her way of saying she'd heard him. When he turned to leave, Lena was waiting by the gate. She had a thoughtful look on her face. "You seem lighter today," she said. I think she finally said goodbye. Daniel replied softly. Or maybe she said, "Keep going." Lena answered with a small smile. He looked at her, then back at the grave. Maybe both. As they walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, shining across the cemetery. The lilies on his mother's grave glowed faintly under the light, as if touched by something pure. Daniel didn't look back this time. He didn't need to. He knew that no matter where life took him, that quiet voice, whether from heaven, memory, or love itself, would always find a way to reach him. And maybe, he thought as the wind brushed past, some things were never meant to be explained. Some things were simply meant to be felt. The rain had been falling all day, turning the narrow streets into mirrors of gray light. Daniel stood by the window of his small house, watching the drops slide down the glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood. The fire from the night before had been small but enough to leave a mark, a blackened corner of his kitchen, a few things ruined, and his nerves shaken. He sighed, running his hand through his hair. The fire had started because of an old wire he hadn't replaced, and he blamed himself. His mother used to remind him to check things like that, and now her voice echoed in his mind again. "Take care of your home, my boy. It takes care of you too." He smiled sadly. The house looked tired, just like him. The walls were stained with smoke, the shelves half empty. Still, it was his, filled with memories, laughter, and quiet moments. As the rain grew heavier, he decided to go out. It was Friday, the day he always visited her. He pulled on his worn coat, grabbed a new bouquet of white lilies, and stepped into the wet evening. The cold air hit his face, and the world smelled of rain and earth, that scent he always associated with peace. By the time he reached the cemetery, the rain had softened into a mist. Drops clung to the iron gate, and the trees whispered as the wind passed through them. He walked the familiar path, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. The silence was comforting, almost sacred. When he reached the grave, he stood still for a moment. The stone looked clean, washed by the rain. He knelt and placed the flowers down, brushing the edges of the stone with his fingers. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling. For a long moment, he said nothing else. He just sat there, listening to the sound of rain against the leaves. Then quietly, he began to speak. "I lost some of your things yesterday," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The fire took them. Your old teacup, the blanket you made for me, a few photos. I tried to save what I could, but—" He paused and looked down. "I'm sorry." He waited, expecting to feel that small, comforting breeze that usually came when he spoke to her. But the air stayed still. The rain fell gently, steady and unchanging. He swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. "Maybe you're quiet tonight because you're resting. That's okay. You've done enough for me." Still, silence answered him. A strange emptiness filled his chest. Not the kind that comes from loneliness, but from something deeper, like standing in the middle of an echo that never comes back. He stayed like that for a while, whispering small things. About the neighbors, cat that kept following him. About Lena bringing him soup, about the small boy down the street who reminded him of himself. But no matter what he said, the air stayed still. The wind didn't move, and the lilies didn't sway. It was the first time since his mother's passing that he felt nothing. Eventually, the rain stopped. The cemetery was silent except for the sound of water dripping from branches. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of his grief pressing against him. For a moment he thought maybe this was it. Maybe her voice, her presence, had finally faded for good. As he turned to leave, he looked back one last time. The white lilies glowed faintly in the moonlight that had broken through the clouds. Something inside him told him to wait. So he did. He stood there, his heart open, his eyes fixed on the grave. Minutes passed, maybe more. Then, just as he took a breath to say goodbye, a soft wind brushed against his cheek. It was so faint he almost thought he imagined it. Then another, gentle, steady. The petals of the lilies trembled, one falling lightly against the grass. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his face. "You're still here," he whispered. The breeze moved again, circling him slowly, warm and calm. He could almost hear her laughter in it, that quiet, loving sound that always made him feel safe. For a second, everything around him seemed to pause. The world was quiet, but it was a good quiet, a kind quiet. He smiled, tears mixing with the last drops of rain. "Thank you," he said softly. "You don't have to worry anymore. I'll be okay. I promise." As he stood there, he heard footsteps approaching from behind. He turned to see Lena walking toward him holding an umbrella. Her hair was wet, and her coat was soaked, but she smiled when she saw him. "I thought I'd find you here," she said gently. Daniel wiped his face quickly and smiled back. "Yeah, I guess I needed to be here tonight." She looked down at the grave, then at the lilies. They looked beautiful. He nodded. She always liked white ones,